Hi, this is Ben Welsh coming to you from the LA Times newsroom. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to import data into your Jupyter Notebook using Python's Pandas library. All right. Now, you may remember where we left off is we had a terminal open where we had checked into a virtual environment that had all of the Python tools like pip and the Jupyter Notebook and all that stuff installed. Now, if all the jargon I've just spit out doesn't make sense to you, that's probably because you've missed the earlier chapters of this lesson and you need to go back and check out the earlier videos. If you know what I'm talking about and you can get your terminal up and check into your virtual environment to activate it and get your Jupyter Notebook running, then you're in the right place. All right, now if you already have your notebook running, don't worry, but just as a reminder, to get it started again, you type in Jupyter with a Y space notebook. And that's going to open up our Jupyter Notebook for us to begin work. And in the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how to use Pandas to read in a data file and to begin working around with it and exploring it in Python. The data files we'll be working with come from the California Civic Data Coalition, and I'll show you how to get them in a minute. But first, we need to make a new notebook to start off. All right, so as you may remember, in the upper right-hand corner, there's a new pull-down that appears right here. You're going to click on that and then go to Python 2, which will create a blank new Jupyter Notebook. Now, because we're going to use Pandas to read in our data file, the first thing we need to do is import it here so it's available. Again, we do that by typing Python's built-in import command, and then the word Pandas, because that's the name of the library, and then finally the common alias PD, so that we have a sort of shortcut to which we can refer to Pandas without having to type it all out. Import space Pandas space as, which tells Python we're going to declare an alias, and then a space, and then the alias itself, which is PD. And in our previous lessons, you may remember we were able to do pd.this and pd.that to create a data series and begin working with it, right? Now I'm going to teach you another trick inside of PD that allows you to read in data that's stored in what's called the CSV format, or comma-separated values. And what that really is just a fancy computer programming way of saying a spreadsheet or a file that you could open in Microsoft Excel. And it's just columns or tables of data that's stored with commas between each of the columns so that the computer knows where to split the file and how to structure things. Now, back in our lesson at firstpythonnotebook.org, in the chapter we're now working through, there's a table at the top where I've provided the link to two different files. And we can use the URLs for these files to have Pandas read in the data and take a look at it. But before we do that, I just want to show you what's going to happen. So I've already downloaded this first file, committees.csv, which is a list of all the campaign committees active in the 2016 ballot measure races here in California. And I've already opened that up in Microsoft Excel. And so that CSV file is nothing fancy. It's nothing you probably haven't seen before. It's a data file prepared by the California Civic Data Coalition for us to analyze that has a row for every ballot measure committee and the proposition that it was linked to in 2016, right? And so there's every column here has a title. There's an identifier for the propositions from 2 or 3 different database systems that the California Civic Data Coalition has collated for us. Then there's the name of the proposition, Proposition 51, 52, 53. This is the name of the propositions as they appeared on the ballot. And then the committee that was active on each of those. And there's one row for every committee and its connections to a proposition. So we can see here that yes on Prop 57 was active on Prop 51, or yes on Prop 51, pardon me, and so on and so on down the line. And then here in a final column, it's listed whether that committee supported or opposed the measure. So yes on Prop 51, which is listed as support, unsurprisingly supported Proposition 51, and so on and so forth down the list. Now, here in Microsoft Excel, you could probably do some pretty good data analysis on this file if you knew what you were doing. If you knew how to sort and filter and create a pivot table and kind of mess around with this file, there's probably quite a lot you could get done. And a lot of great data journalism does happen in Microsoft Excel. It's great software. But some downsides are once the file gets to a certain length, say millions and millions of records, it becomes difficult to work with. Another is if your analysis has many different steps that need to be executed in a certain order for things to happen, say 10, 15, 20 clicks to sort of get to the bottom of what you're trying to do. If you do it once, it can be pretty tedious to repeat yourself, and you might not remember everything you did. And those are two problems. There's a couple more other problems, but those are two big problems that working with Python and computer programming can help you solve. You can work with bigger files, and everything you do is going to be really clearly documented in this Jupyter Notebook. But you don't have to take my word for it. You're going to see you're going to see it. You're going to see why in the next few minutes and over the next few lessons as we continue to walk through this. All right. So let's get it out of the spreadsheet and into our programming code. So that's going to be our next step. So I'm going to go back to the tab here on the lesson plan. I'm just going to right-click on the hyperlink for that download, and I'm going to go to Copy Link Address. So now my clipboard has the complete URL that goes to that file. All right, so I'm going to store that away for a moment. Now I'm going to go back to my notebook, where all I've done is import pandas. And now pandas just happens to have a very helpful method called read CSV, which allows it to take a CSV data file and read it into pandas so that it can begin to work with it. And the way you get to that is you type PD, which again is our alias for pandas, period. And now, as you may remember from the previous lessons, there's all sorts of helpful commands that are hidden behind that period, the dozens and dozens of tools built into the system ready for you to access, whether you know about them or not. And again, you can hit the tab button in the notebook just to get a sneak peek at what those many methods are. And hey, there's the one we're going to use, read underscore CSV. So by typing read underscore CSV, I'm accessing that method that's deep down inside of pandas waiting for me to take advantage of it. And since it's the one I want, now's the time. Then it needs to know which CSV it's supposed to read, right? So this method expects an input. It expects us to give it some information about what it needs to read in. Now this method could read in files off your computer if you gave it a path to a folder on your system, but even better, it can read files directly off the internet. And so so we're going to give it the URL that I copied to the clipboard as an input to tell it to go to that link and download the file and read it into this system. And to do that, you have to open a parenthesis, and the notebook will probably automatically close a parenthesis right after it. And that's because this is the typical way in which a method accepts inputs. So in Python, when you have a method that needs an input, usually it's a pair of parentheses that are opened and closed immediately after the name of the method, and then inside that parenthesis you put the 1, 2, 3, 5, 10, 20, however many inputs are necessary for that function to run. In this case, there's really only one input it needs. It needs either the path to the file on your computer or the URL on the internet where the file can be downloaded. I'm going to give it the URL. Now, it expects it to be put between two quotation marks so that it knows in computer speak that this is a string of characters that it's going to interpret. So I'm going to put two quotation marks right there. You can see them separated. And then between them, I'm going to paste in. Oh, the paste didn't work. I'm going to paste in that URL. Let's try again. Copy the link address. Paste it in. There. Now, if you're typing it from scratch, you got to get it exactly right, which is why I pasted it. But just so that you can see it, I'm going to leave it here for a second and I'm going to read it out. It's a standard web address. It begins with http:// then www.firstpythonnotebook.org/static/committees.csv. I've typed all that in, and again, just like anything else in the notebook, I can go to the top and hit the play button. That will now run that cell, and what you can see is that immediately below it, it should have printed out a table, not unlike a spreadsheet, that reflects the structure within that file that's been detected by the computer. That this is a list of rows and columns that can be broken up into a grid. It's not quite as pretty as Microsoft Excel, but in some ways it's similar. You can see those same columns that we saw in Excel are bolded here at the top, and below them are the data values that are found in each of the rows as you scroll down. You should see something very similar. All right. Now this output And the thing that is sort of created within Pandas when it reads in a CSV file is what is known as a data frame. And this is a term that you're going to hear a lot if you read about Pandas elsewhere on the web and as we work through this course. And the data frame is just a piece of jargon that was invented in Pandas to describe the table of data or the spreadsheet of data after it's been read into Pandas and when Pandas is sort of using its many methods to operate on it. So that it's kind of a strange term. It's often spelled capital D, capital F. Data frame is one word. But all it really means is a table of data that you've read in from a CSV or a database or some other source, JSON data perhaps, into Pandas, and then it's going to interpret and interact with in the same way Excel would interact with a spreadsheet. All right, but as you can see, all we've done so far is just print out that data frame. We've executed our line of code, and all it does is print it out. And it's only printed out the first few rows because that's kind of the way these things work. But there's not much else we can do with it at this point. It's just there, it's been printed out, we can't access it in future cells, we can't use other methods to mess around with it unless we figure out a way to save it for later. All right? And here we're going to introduce one of the fundamental concepts of computer programming that some of you may know and some of you may not, and it's totally okay if you don't. And it's what's called a variable. And a variable is really just a shortcut where you can save values and operations from your scripts to use them later. And it's sometimes called a namespace, which is again a very technical term, just like variable, but it's really just a shortcut that you choose the name of that you can reuse later on in your code. And so what we want to do at this stage is we want to save our data frame into a shortcut so that we can reuse it in subsequent cells as we work down the notebook, so that I can teach you some other cool things we can do with a data frame. All right, and the way we do that is we're going to go back to this cell that we just wrote. I'm going to click on the far left-hand side before all of the code, and now I'm going to type in the name for this data frame. And like everything in programming, naming things is hard. There's rarely the perfect name for anything. You just come up with the best thing you can, and usually short is good, but not too short so that it's confusing. Since this is a list of propositions and their committees, I'm simply just going to call it props, okay? And so I'm going to do props is the name I'd like to give this, a space, the equal sign, and then another space. And this is now, when I run this code, going to save the result of this Pandas code into this variable so it can be reused later. So now I'm going to go click on it and hit the play button again. And now you can see it's run, but nothing is printed out. The data frame that was dumped into the notebook before has disappeared, and we've simply just moved on to another cell. And that's because the output of this method has now been saved into here rather than printed out into the notebook. Now printing it out again is not hard. I can go to this next cell, and I can just type that shortcut, props, and I can hit play again. And you can see there it is, exactly as before, in fact identical to before, is the output, right? But we're able to print it out when we choose rather than having it just go out. And here's the fun part. Now that we've saved it, there's all sorts of other cool stuff we can do with it, right? We can do another magic period like we did before to allow us to access a whole different set of magic methods that are available on every single data frame. And there's two more I'm going to teach you in this video that I think you'll find really useful and that I use almost every single time I read a CSV file into Pandas. All right?